If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what are some scary stories that creeped you out? When I was about 13, my mom and dad invited round our previous neighbors from the block of flats we lived in until I was 5 years old. Anyway, I'd been sent to bed but could still hear everyone talking about this and that, until the woman neighbor said, "Hey Digsy's mom, do you remember when Digsy used to complain that there was someone in his room? Well, there's a family that's just moved into the floor above who have a 3-year-old son. He is complaining of the exact same things Digsy did." This creeped me out. I had no recollection of any of this, so the next day asked my mom. Her first reaction was, "You don't remember?" Then she told me all about the weird stuff that used to happen, footsteps up and down the hall, shit going missing and stuff. She said the final thing to happen was when she was listening to a record one day, and it started to slow down, like someone was holding a finger gently on the platter till it finally came to a stop. My mom said she snapped at this point, and started shouting, "Will you leave us the fuck alone?" As soon as she said this, the record went straight back to playing normally, and we never experienced anything again. I've never experienced anything like that since, and these days I'm quite skeptical of such stories, but I believe my mom. Strangest thing is how I found out about it, from someone else 10 years later experiencing something similar. So Reddit, Halloween is almost upon us. Now's your chance to share something freaky. Okay, this is 100% true even though most people I tell this to in real life don't believe me. When I was really little, my parents would let me stay up late on the weekends and watch TV until I fell asleep. I really loved these times and I would stay up later than anybody else just because I could. Well, one night I was almost asleep on the couch when I heard a noise on our front porch. It was the sound of our old-fashioned porch swing moving back and forth. I was a little scared, so I crept toward the bay windows of my living room and peeked out towards the porch. Sitting on my front porch swing was an older woman, probably in her 50s, wearing nothing but a nightgown, covered in blood and holding a huge kitchen knife. I flipped out immediately and ran screaming into my parents' room but was too terrified to form words. My parents saw that I was upset, but when I finally was able to tell them what I saw, my dad got really angry and told me that it was just a dream and to go back to bed. I refused and kept crying and screaming until he had had enough and snatched my arm and dragged me towards the front door to prove that nothing was there. I kicked and screamed all the way trying to make him stop, but he kept pulling me. Finally we got to the door, he unlocked it, swung it open and said, "See, there's nothing." To this day, I have never seen the look of fear and shock that was on his face when that woman turned and stared at both of us and slowly stood up with the knife. My dad slammed the door shut and got my mom to call the police while he went and got his gun. He went back to the door with a 12 gauge and cracked the door enough to stick the barrel out. He asked her what she was doing and she said somebody killed my husband, but it wasn't me. My dad told her that the police were coming and she freaked out, grabbed the knife and walked away. Police found her 15 minutes later trying to break into one of our neighbors' houses. I never slept in the living room again. Okay, Reddit. I've never shared this story on the internet before. r/no sleep doesn't seem to be the place for it. I share made up creepy stories there, but this is my genuine terrifying childhood experience. I have my share of believable creepy stuff that's happened to me, but this is paranormal-ish and I'm always somewhat uneasy about sharing it because, as a skeptic, I'd normally call this kind of story bullshit. Just like my parents and friends would tell me. I was always the kid that made up stories, but this one is real. I shared a room with my sister around the age of 7, but she was off at a sleepover party the night it happened. As a little kid, I was terrified of lots of things. I'd never seen anything close to a horror film, not even The Nightmare Before Christmas, because of how jumpy I was. So naturally the dark freaked me out. I was really nightmare prone, which caused everyone to say this was a dream later. But this was different. It was more vivid. Too realistic to be a dream. I was hiding under my sheets like the cowardly kid I was when I decided to poke my head out to get some cool air, and I saw something in my room. Something clearly not human. I called it an alien at the time because that's the closest thing my horror-ignorant mind could liken it to. Now, I see it as more similar to the rake or the Mothman. Its head was big and egg-shaped, like those stereotypical gray aliens. Far too big for its tiny, slender body. It was totally naked. Pale gray or ashen white skin, the lack of light made it hard to tell. All the bones were visible. Its tiny shriveled sack and penis just hung there between its legs. Its hands were way too big for the toothpick-like arms. It was standing at a really unnatural angle. Its eyes were totally black and shiny, seemed to be the only feature on its weird head, and were sunken in little red holes. Most unsettling of all, it was just staring at me. After a few seconds of being completely paralyzed in fear, I pulled the covers back up over my head, What else could I do? I stayed there for the rest of the night, until I fell asleep. I know this thing wasn't human. I told my parents the next day and they said I was dreaming. I made up a lot of stories back then. I remember a lot of them vividly, and the rest of my childhood is really, really hazy. But seeing that thing in my room is one of the childhood memories that stuck with me the most. I have no idea what it was, and despite my fascination with horror stories, I don't think I want to know. When I was younger, we frequently visited my grandparents around holidays even though we didn't live in the same town. My aunt lived 2 houses down from my grandparents. The lady in the house between was creepy. She was a large woman, over 6 feet. She wore logging chains around her neck, a dress and work boots. The only time I remember seeing her outside was either in her garden in the back or when she was washing the outside of her house. Scrubbing the actual building. She did this often. During these times she would yell at us kids and call us all kinds of things. She would tell us the devil would be coming for us. The adults told us to leave her alone and to avoid her. We would run the distance between my aunts and my grandparents because when you passed by she was watching out the windows. It was creepy and we never went alone. One Halloween one of the cousins dared us to trick or treat her house. I remember how scared I was, but I didn't want to be a chicken. Plus I was going with a group. One of us rang the doorbell and there was a lot of banging noises in the house, suddenly like doors slamming. When she answered the door she had a severed head in her hands and we all went screaming. The adults told us it was a Halloween prop and we knew we shouldn't be bothering her and deserved to be scared. About a month later my parents got a phone call that the lady had tried to kill my aunt while she was bringing in groceries and had my young cousin in her arms. The lady had one of them rope saws and had come up behind my aunt with it. She put it over her head and around her neck and proceeded to saw. My aunt naturally flipped and started kicking the door. My uncle came and beat the lady down with a fire poker. The police investigation revealed that the woman had been digging tunnels under her home which were coming up under my aunt's, my grandparents' and another neighbor's house. She had been bringing the dirt up and putting it in the raised beds of the gardens. She also had a shrine of some sort underground which had a few severed heads around it. My aunt survived BTW but has a long scar across her neck. I don't have any way to verify whether this is actually a family story or whether it's an urban legend, but here. My family has lived in rural Nebraska since they immigrated from Germany in the mid-1800s. Near the turn of the century disease was pretty rampant in the homesteading area and it killed off members of almost every family. When someone died from illness, time was of the essence in burying them as not to let the virus spread from the deceased to the living. This meant no wake periods. So an aunt of some unknown number of grades preceding her relationship to me dies of some disease and she gets buried in the family cemetery onto the homestead. The dogs were very fond of her, so it wasn't too surprising that after the funeral the 2 dogs stuck near the grave. The rest of the family began to think something of it when, a week and a half later, the dogs were still visiting her grave almost constantly. But they weren't just at the grave. They were visibly distressed, frantic, and often barking while there. This goes on for maybe 2 weeks when the family decides to check it out. They dig the casket up and open it. The deceased's hair has all been pulled out. Her fingers are raw and bloody and mangled from where, on the inside of the casket door, they can see deep scratches in the wood. She was comatose when they buried her, and she came to while underground, spending probably her last 5 or so days alive in a buried casket. I'm not sure how freaky it is, since it's not paranormal or anything, but when I was about 7 years old I went on a walk with my babysitter. We were walking back a mile or so to my house on a fairly busy road and about halfway there she says we should play Simon Says. At first we walk faster, then skip, and then jog lightly. Then she says Simon Says run as fast as you can. Simon Says turn here. I was slightly confused, but played along. As we turned down the driveway I looked back and saw 2 guys chasing after us, one with a bat and the other with a knife. We ran up to a house and some old people living there let us in thankfully. At the time I didn't grasp how fucked up it was that we were getting chased and I still have no clue why they were. So, my mom remarried about 2 years ago. My dad died when I was 12, so she had been widowed for over 10 years. This new relationship was very whirlwind with them meeting, dating, and getting married within 3 months. I didn't know much about the guy, but my mom was happy, so I just tried to be supportive. She moved into his house in upstate Virginia and invited my fiancé and I to spend a weekend in her new home getting to know her new husband. My mom's new home was pretty isolated. It sat on a few hundred acres of lovely rolling hills, and was very picturesque. I was nervous about getting to know this guy, but really trying to make the most of it. Over the course of our first day there though, I felt more and more uneasy. I didn't think it was weird, just silly. My mom's new husband was being very welcoming and friendly. We were being made to feel very at home, yet I still couldn't shake this oppressive feeling. I finally chalked it up to me being more upset about my mom getting remarried than I was willing to admit to myself. We spent most of the day wandering around outside since I felt worse when indoors. That night my fiancé and I showered together. When I turned my back to him, he stopped talking mid-sentence and asked, "What did you do to your back?" "Well, nothing." "Why?" "You have a large bruise." I hopped out to try and see it in the mirror. I got back in and we finished showering in silence. Then it was off to bed. The one window in our room looked out over a pitch-black empty field, but I couldn't sleep until I hung something over the window. I felt sure that otherwise someone would watch us through the window. The next morning I had a complete meltdown. I woke up and just couldn't stop crying. I told my finance we had to leave. He tried to calm me down by telling me all the things I had been telling myself. My feelings of anxiety were just a result of seeing my mom with someone. The longer I spent with them, the easier it would become. But I just had to leave. It was only Saturday morning and we were supposed to stay until Monday, but I felt completely hysterical. I knew I was on the verge of a panic attack and my only concrete thought was I had to stop crying long enough to make our excuses and get the hell out. We did. As soon as we were on the road, I felt like a weight had been lifted. I was even feeling embarrassed for my behavior, hoping I hadn't insulted my mom's husband by leaving early. Then my fiancé broke the silence. "That bruise on your back, did you get a good look at it?" I had. It looked like some had touched the middle of back, with fingers spread wide, with their hand at a tilt. I wanted to make completely clear, no one had touched my back the previous day, especially hard enough to bruise me. Cut to 3 weeks later. My mom comes to visit me. The entire time she's hounding me to come stay with her again. After finally trying to change the subject for the 5th time, I level with her. Before I've even finished telling the story, her face is white as a sheet. She tells me she has been feeling the same way in the house. She hates it. She wants them to move as soon as possible. And the real kicker, her new husband's previous wife shot and killed herself right outside in the same field our room window overlooked. This is a true story. Me and my roommate, we'll call him Steven, had a pretty big party for his 30th birthday. There's cake, balloons, weed, and booze. We were having a great time when one of Steven's friends tells him he'll give him $100 to go to the casino and gamble, but he has to go gamble with him. My roommate says hell yeah. They get ready to leave, so does everyone else, and the party ends. So eventually everyone leaves and it's just me. I clean up a bit, turn all the lights off in the apartment except my bedroom light, get into my nightwear and sit on my bed to watch some TV. As I'm sitting there, I keep hearing this dragging noise, followed 15 seconds later by a light plop. This goes on for 25 to 30 minutes, but I don't see anything out of the ordinary, so I figure maybe it's something going wrong with the fish tank. I keep hearing this for 15 more minutes, thinking nothing of it, when some movement by my bedroom door catches my attention. One of the balloons we used for the party, a big number 0, is sitting at the threshold of my door, seemingly appearing out of nowhere. I just stare at it like WTF, then as if on cue, it moves inside my room, dragging the plastic bottom on the ground about half a foot, floats up about a half a foot, floats forward about a foot very slowly, and plops the weight back down on the ground. Then it just sits there, doing nothing, and a few minutes later it would repeat it. All this time I'm sitting there horrified. The balloon continues to move toward me in my bed until it plops down right at the edge of my bed and kind of leans in, right in my face. I jumped up and backed way the fuck up, searching for a logical explanation for what I just observed. It was October 11, 2001. 1 month after 9/11. I was 14 years old and my grandfather died in his sleep, an empty bottle of whiskey at his bedside. I was devastated. He was the best grandpa, and I could tell I was his favorite. At his funeral I remember standing at his burial ceremony. I was a little farther back than most of our family. I needed my space and I was grieving hard. I remember closing my eyes, folding my arms and burying my head into my jacket and crying. My mom then put her arm around me and cried with me. I felt her, heard her crying into my cheek, her voice mauled by my jacket. She let go and I opened my eyes. What I saw made my heart skip a beat. My mother was standing 20 feet in front of me. Everyone was. I looked around and realized I was completely alone the whole time. I don't know who hugged me, maybe it was my grandpa, maybe I mistook my grandpa's voice for my mother's. To this day I am still confused and a little creeped out. When I was about 6 or 7 years old, my family decided to go on summer vacation up to a little island in Maine. We rented out this old house on the water. From what I can remember, there were about 6 or 7 other houses on the island. Everyone else who lived there was in their 60 plus years of age, except for this mid-40s gentleman who fished on the water. His name was Bubba, I shit you not. Anyway, the island was exceedingly creepy. Everything about the house was really old. Every piece of furniture from that house was probably over 60 years old, not to mention there was no television, running water was used through a well and pump, hundreds of books and pictures in the house dated through at least the last 100 years. To make things more pants-shittingly creepy, there was an infestation of rats in the backyard that would run around at night. Also, whenever we made dinner, all of the old ladies who lived in the houses on the island somehow knew, and would show up and give us blueberry pie and fresh-caught bluefish. It was really creepy. It was as if everyone knew what we were doing and when we did it. Long story short, a few nights into our stay at this house, my parents started hearing singing at night. They said that it would start and stop for about 20 to 30 minutes. The first few nights they didn't think much of it. The following day, they asked around but they couldn't find the source of the singing. The second to last night on our week-long stay, my whole family heard the singing, and we went outside to find out what was going on. It sounded like a choir of children. It really freaked all of us out, but we didn't want it to ruin the trip. It was just very mysterious. The next day my dad starts checking out some of the old photos and books in the library and finds this old scrapbook dated to the early 1920s. The house we were living in was once an old schoolhouse, and there was a picture of the boys' choir. We all shat bracks. Left the next day. This sounds really crazy, so I made a throwaway to avoid my RL Redditor friends. I don't care if you don't believe me, but here are the facts. For years, I'd go through periods where when I was trying to fall asleep I'd see a bunch of faces when I closed my eyes. They were all angry faces, very angry and menacing. They'd come towards me then kind of fade off to the sides, 2 rows, one on each side. Sometimes it was just angry eyes. Human, animal, cartoon, all very angry. It took a long time to realize that when I saw these faces, it meant I was about to dream about a place I actually really liked. The place only existed in my dreams, but it was like an alternate universe for me. I had memories of that place like anyone does about their childhood, but it didn't exist. I don't want to expand on the dream place because I'm trying to get back there again and I don't want to ruin my chances. I told a few people once about this place, specific things I remember. Then a few nights later the angry faces were back and I was all excited about going to my favorite place again. When I got there, various people who lived there, people I knew and liked, suddenly had angry faces, like the ones that usually come before I go to this place. They shot me. 3 times. In 3 different rooms. Twice I woke up after getting shot. I didn't wake up in real life, but the me in my dream woke up. I thought, wow, I'm glad I made it through that, looked over, saw another old friend with a now angry face, and get shot again. I didn't wake up the 3rd time. This shooting happened about 7 to 8 years ago. I've really missed the place. I keep trying to force myself to remember the angry faces, thinking if I can fall asleep visualizing them they might show up. No such luck, but about 2 years ago I was dreaming I was in some kind of street market, either an old-timey one or one located in a country that wasn't at all modern. A woman was leaning over a well in the middle of the town square. She was wearing a large brimmed, purple hat. She looked right at me. Angry face, like the old days. I was both freaked out and kind of relieved. Like somehow I wasn't forgotten by that place and those people I used to visit. That was 2 years ago. I now work in a hotel in the heart of downtown Chicago. I see a lot of people on the street. I sold my car last winter and take public transportation, so I see more people now than I used to when I just drive by in my car. I'm in crowds fairly often. And 6 months ago, I saw that woman. I wasn't dreaming. I checked. That woman from the well was there, and she had her angry face on. In the last 6 months or so, I've seen 10 to 12 more people who were glaring at me, the way those faces used to. Then the people disappear in the crowd when I try to follow them. I'm kind of scared, but I'm also kind of thrilled. I know I sound crazy, but these people might be following me around in real life now. I still can't get back to that place I used to go to, though. Back when I was in college there was an old dormitory that was empty and locked up. The first floor windows were covered up with thick black curtains and the doors had chains and padlocks on them. Well, my second year of school I got my EMT certification and started working for the campus EMS squad. That was easily my coolest job ever, and there were perks other students couldn't get. One of those were keys for everything. So obviously we used those keys to go everywhere. Most places were pretty boring. My now best friend, who was the other EMT I worked with, decided to make the old dorm our hangout place. We would sneak in with friends and drink there on the weekends or nights where we didn't have class. We usually stayed on the first floor on just one wing of the dorm. The one closest to the back entrance. We didn't stray because the place was dirty and had cobwebs. So one night we were drinking in the one room we set up with tables and chairs that we seized. We were all together. Nobody was missing when somebody very close to our room and very loudly screamed, "Who the fuck is there?" To which one of yous drunkenly responded, "Who the fuck do you think it is?" A very confused voice responded back, "You're not coming with me then, John?" They sounded like they were walking away from us towards the center of the building, away from the stairwell. Incidentally, none of us were named John. A few minutes later we could hear on the floor above us, a very old building floor that's super thick, a rumbling sound that kind of shook the walls. The rumbling stopped right above us with a giant crash. Shit officially just got creepy. We all run up the stairs and make our way to the hallway above the one we were hanging out at. Right at where our room would be on the first floor was a giant filing cabinet on wheels. It was just there. Nobody else was there. You could see the wheel tracks on the floor because it was dusty as shit. But there were no other footprints around besides our own. We all fucking bolted without getting our stuff. No stopping to get our booze, or turning off our radio, or turning off our battery-powered lantern. So we obviously have to back and get our shit. We waited a few days. A friend of mine and I went one evening to go get it. First we go to the window and see if we can see our stuff in there. My friend looks in. I didn't. He said he thought he saw somebody in the doorway. I thought he was acting retarded because of what happened the other night. We sneak in and make it to the room and get our shit. Somewhere down and towards the center of the building we hear a door shut. It's completely dark that way. We hear a door closer open and we don't wait to find out what the fuck that's about. So I'm not a person who believes in supernatural stuff, and the same goes for my friends. We decide that we need to figure out what the hell is going on with this building. So about 6 of us devise a pretty easy plan to go about with. We circle the building one night and check all the doors and windows to make sure they were all locked up. Then we went to our usual entrance. Left 2 people on the inside of it to make sure nobody came in or out. Then the rest started going from dorm room to dorm room checking to make sure nobody else was there. We'd go hello. And obviously get no response. We make it through our hallway we hang out at and our tensions ease up. One of the people at the outside door moves up to where we stopped and we go to the second floor where the filing cabinet was. Because it's back at the original place with the wheel tracks and no fucking footprints. Tension in the group rise. We start doing the whole hello? And no response thing again. We get about halfway though the hall and one of us gets the idea of saying, "Oh come on, it's your friend Johnny." A giant thud below us. Muffled screams from the 2 we left as lookouts, probably saying something along the lines of "What the fuck was / is that?" A giant thud behind us on the same floor. Where nobody could have been because we went through those rooms and we would have noticed somebody else slamming a door right fucking behind us. It turns into a race to get back out the way we came. Past the doors that were just slammed. As we get into our hallway we can hear doors opening and closing in a way that something was coming toward us from the center of the building again. We get a few hundred yards away before we all stop running and make sure we all made it. We found another place to hang out after that. It's torn down now and a real dorm is built over it. Anyways, I grew up in a small town in Kansas that I have since gotten the fuck out of. The town had tons of meth-addicted trailer trash. One time a good friend of mine spotted some creepy abandoned house on some off-road several miles outside of town. We were fucking stupid and decided to check it out. You could tell it was abandoned because the windows were all busted out and all that. The front door was jammed shut, but we managed to get in by shoving ourselves into it hard enough. The house smelled like chemicals. I'm not sure how else to describe it, but the air kind of stung your nose very slightly when you breathed in. One thing I saw, but never gave a second thought to until later, was a metal can full of rocks with a string cutting across about a foot above foot level in a doorway. We just stepped over it. We eventually made our way upstairs. There was broken glass all up the stairs, and it cracked loudly as we walked up. Yes, I know at this point you're going to think we were dumb as hell for not getting the fuck out of there, and you are absolutely correct, but we were some dumb 16-year-olds who were a bit too curious. Anyways, at the top of the stairs we saw some scary as hell junkie. He was holding a handgun. He was freaking out and screaming shit at us. We ran the fuck out of there. Turns out we stumbled into a meth lab. I drove past the place a couple of years ago and the house has been torn down. Scariest thing that's happened to me though. Some people tell me I'm creepy for doing this. For the past few months, I've been trying to get better at staying conscious as I fall asleep, if that makes any sense. I'm completely aware that I'm falling asleep, and once I reach my half-dream state, I start hearing voices talking in the room I am sleeping in, and occasionally seeing people as well. They'll talk about pretty much anything. Sleep paralysis hits me hard though, That feeling when your body goes numb, so I can't interact with them beyond some verbal responses. I can look around the room most of the time too. It's really hard to maintain, too much awareness wakes me up, but too little and I'll lose consciousness. But on those days where I get it just right, I can maintain it for maybe 5 to 15 minutes on average, and sometimes I even hit full-on lucid dreaming for a few hours. When I wake up, I'm completely aware of how long I was asleep and can guess the time with about a 5-minute uncertainty. I went coon hunting with my uncle in the woods of southern Ohio. These lights and noise came out of nowhere and seemed to pin us down. The red bones, coon hounds, went silent and cried on the ground. They are not afraid of bears or anything I have seen, as a heavy fog rolled onto us, and we were almost frozen. 2 seconds later it was all gone, the fog and everything. The dogs were still freaked out, so we knew it was just not us. I was 12, so I was not drunk or on drugs. Creeps me out to this day. Nice to see you, Digsy. I've got 2 stories. One's creepy, one's not so creepy but probably appropriate for here. Here's the first. My mom is the oldest of 6 children, and the oldest 5 are all 2 years apart from each other. So, when she was in high school in 16-17-ish, she did a lot of babysitting for her siblings/my aunts and uncles. She's babysitting the family one night in winter, and the phone rings. It's the neighbor across the street. Neighbor tells her don't turn around, but we are looking at your house right now, and we can see you and your siblings watching TV, and we see the back of your head while you're sitting on the sofa. Okay, my mom says, thinking this is really weird. Well, the neighbors say, we also see a man right outside the house staring right into the window of the room you and your siblings are all in. Don't move. Don't do anything. We've already called the cops. Cops show up just a few minutes later. Man fled the scene and was never caught, but being winter, there was a dusting of snow on the ground, and there were footprints all around the house stopping at every window. Here's the second. This one isn't creepy in the scary sense, but in the spine-tingling sense, at least it is for me for obvious reasons. When I was young I had a dream. In the dream I was standing in a giant field of dying knee-high grass, and the field was encircled by a huge range of mountains. It was brilliantly sunny out. There was a path that cut straight through the field. I stood in the middle of the field on the path, in the center of the circle. The path cut straight through both sides of the circling mountains, creating a giant gorge at either end of the circle. I'm trying to describe this as well as possible. Apologies. As I'm standing in the middle of the circle, out of nowhere my grandfather appears walking towards me. He stops and we have a discussion. It's very nondescript and pretty short, but ends with him telling me that he's proud of me and that he needs to get going. We say goodbye, and he walks away from me along the path towards the other end. I wake up to the phone ringing. My mom answers it. It's the hospital notifying my parents my grandfather had passed away. My dad tells a story, and I will do the best to recall the details, but my dad was 12 or so and had a cousin that was 8 or so. My dad's aunt had driven down from Louisville for the weekend to visit with the family and brought the kid with her. My dad said that when the kid arrived he told him that he had had a bad dream the night before, that we was in a coffin and he couldn't get out. My dad told him not to be silly, and my grandfather and dad were going to the feed mill to pick up a load of grain and he rode with them. On the way they passed the church graveyard and my dad's cousin asked my grandfather that if he were in a coffin would he be buried there. My grandfather laughed and said maybe one of these days, but that is a long time off, so he shouldn't worry about it. They get the load of feed at the mill and head back to the house. The next day on Sunday they get up and go to church, and in Sunday school they had all the kids together, and my dad said his cousin asked what it was like to be with Jesus, and the teacher tried to continue on with her lesson plan, but then he started to cry, and said he needed to know. So she changed and talked about what they thought heaven would be like. After church he was crossing the road to the parking lot and was hit by a car and killed. My dad and grandfather will say it's almost like he knew he was going to die then. Gives me the shivers a bit. I've had a few strange and creepy experiences growing up. The creepiest by far though was when I was in high school. It was summer and my mother had left her laptop home for me to use to pass the time during the day since she had left me no chores that day. Our house, an old 2-story building that was built in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It has hardwood floors throughout the first floor and carpeted on the second. Because of the age of the building, and the fact that the second story was a later addition, no matter where you are upstairs you can hear, and often feel, when someone is walking around downstairs. If you have ever lived in an old house with hardwood floors, you understand what I'm talking about. So one evening I was laying out on the floor in my room whilst I used the computer. AIM was a must given the fact that it was the turn of the millennium and MSN hadn't figured out that whole Mac/Microsoft bridge yet. I remember hearing my stepdad drive into the driveway at the back of the house. Hopping to my feet, I looked through the navy blue curtains and could see the red hue of his burgundy Chevy Denali in the driveway. I immediately laid back down and told my friend that I had to log off. Stepfather was home and was going to be pissed that I was using my mother's computer, even if it was with permission. Around this point I heard him set the alarm on his car, walk up the porch stairs, fumble with his keys, and lumber into the den where he heavily dropped his stuff. I cursed under my breath and hastily logged off. Gathering up the computer, I slinked my way to the stairwell ready to take my licks. However, when I got to the stairwell I noticed all the lights were off downstairs still. I thought, that's fine, sometimes he doesn't turn on lights. It's his house, he knows where stuff is. So I force a nervous chuckle and head down the rest of the stairs, into the darkness of the first floor. Sorry about using her laptop. She said I could. Silence greeted my words. Odd, I thought, usually he chides me or otherwise takes me down a notch. Thinking he is in the bathroom, I set the laptop on the couch in the den and began to leave. It was then, as my eyes finished adjusting to the light, that I noticed it. His things were not where I had thought they would be. My heart skips a beat and my eyes fly to the window that looks into our backyard and driveway. The light is on, but there is no Denali. Fearing a burglar, I rushed to the back door only to find it locked securely. Too afraid to do anything else, I grabbed the cordless phone and hightailed it to my room, locking myself in. This is where the experience was taken to a new level. Sitting in my room, panting and shaking as I held the phone, I could both hear and feel as multiple people were walking around on the hardwood floor. Some people even felt like they were stomping. Realizing that I may not be alone, I thought of the only thing a crazed teenage girl could think of. I called my friends across the street. The first friend was a talking whore. I figured she would never answer. I was used to her busy signal, but I had to try. Punching in the number quickly, I brought the phone to my ear and waited. Dial tone, 3 ring, voicemail. Shit. Fuck. Dialed up the second friend. I felt I had a chance. She was never on the phone, busy signal. Sure, the third friend, the one I was talking to online, would answer, busy signal, dial up FML. So I'm sitting there, listening to the footsteps and the dial tone as I'm trying to figure out if I should try the first friend again. Static crackled through the dial tone and broke my thoughts as I stared at it. Almost immediately the static shift from a crackle to laughter and I straight up opened my door and chucked the phone down the hall. The footsteps got louder and I tried to think out a resolution to the problem. I needed the third friend off the internet. I needed someone to validate that I wasn't going crazy and hearing things. But the only way to get her offline would be to go get the computer from the first floor. Swallowing hard, I threw open the bedroom door and made a mad dash for the computer. I grabbed the computer and rushed back upstairs. While I was down there, I could hear the footsteps in other rooms other than the ones I was in. Rushing back into my room, I hopped back online and forced my friend to get off the internet so I could call her. Retrieving the phone from the hallway, I relocked myself in and dialed her up. When she answered, I recounted what had happened and asked her if she could hear it. For listening purposes, I made my way towards the stairwell, aka fucking wooden echo chamber. Eventually it stopped and then seemed to start back up again, only lights were turning on. Inching down, I realized it was my mother and told the friend I would talk to her later. After a little talk with my mother, I found out that she had been home for about 5 minutes. This had all started at about 7 p.m. Even if my mother had been way off, and arrived 15 minutes before, that would still leave me with 15 minutes of unexplained phenomena. When I was a freshman in college, I was on a film shoot near Barstow on Route 66. We were shooting on the property of the cafe known for the film Baghdad Cafe. This property has an abandoned motel attached to it, which is where we were shooting this unbelievably bad horror film. The motel's floor was full of papers, something I initially figured was a relic from the past, while the motel was actually doing business. A while into the shoot, we started picking up the papers and reading them. They were handwritten letters from the 70s, perhaps never sent. They were addressed to dozens of different people, starting out normal, but going on to describe some really fucked up things. This was a guy who literally had some demons. He kept talking about how they were watching him and the like. The handwriting also got more and more messed up as we assembled the letters chronologically. Meanwhile, outside the motel there was a storage container with "Keep Out" spray painted on it. Naturally, we were curious. There was a hole in the side, and someone reached in and pulled out some documents. Among them was a letter, on government typeface, I think it was the VA, telling the person who wrote those crazy letters that he was, unknowingly, a participant of some tests of hallucinogenic substances while he was in the army. This whole time, there was a room in the abandoned motel that was sealed off, that we were strictly forbidden from entering. All the windows were covered by plywood and the door was barricaded shut. It smelled like death. Seriously, the worst smell I've ever encountered in my life. When I was a kid, I had an imaginary friend named Jesse. I don't really remember much about him, but I remember my parents asking about him quite a lot and seeming quite concerned. Anyway, a couple of years ago while visiting relatives in Ireland, we were all exchanging ghost stories. My family has a lot of creepy shit happening to them. When my mum brought up Jesse, so I was obviously quite confused because I thought he was just an imaginary friend. Well, my mum started off by saying how she didn't understand why I called him Jesse, as I'd never heard that name before and she didn't know anyone who was called that, which I didn't think was too weird. It's just a name, right? Then she said that one time when my dad was on his way to work, he was an electrician in a mine at the time. I asked him to bring back coal for Jesse's gran. I was about 2/3 at the time and wouldn't have understood what a mine was if I even knew he worked in one. Then the end of her story was when we were on a day trip to a place we visited a lot when I was really young, and I suddenly just ran off and they followed me into a graveyard. I ran straight to a small grave and stopped and just stared at it. It was Jesse's grave. I felt quite creeped out that I spent a lot of time as a child playing with a ghost. I'm a kid who likes his sleep very much, so my dad often had to wake me up as I slept through my alarm. He wakes me up the same way every time, by gently putting a hand on my shoulder, and then, since I usually plead for 5 more minutes, he yanks the covers off and forces me up. So a few weeks ago I had to get up very early to go play pickup basketball in the morning with some friends. I set my alarm the night before and went to sleep. My dad works very far away, so he often sleeps at work 2 or 3 nights a week, and that night he wasn't sleeping at home, so I knew I had to get myself up. I eventually fall asleep and I then wake up to a hand on my shoulder, murmur the usual 5 more minutes, and then I feel the covers yanked off me all the way off the bed. I shot up out of bed because it was habit at this point, because this is when I knew my dad was serious. I opened my eyes and it was pitch black in my room and nobody was there. I looked around and saw nothing. Just the lights on my clock that said it was 2:30 in the morning. I was a little more than slightly freaked out. I asked my mom in the morning if my dad had came home, but she said no, he had stayed at work. TLD or something woke me the fuck up in the middle of the night and yanked all the covers off my bed, but nothing was there. When I was about 10, my father and his friends had gone duck hunting and weren't due back until late that night. My mother sent me to bed around 10 p.m. Around midnight my father and his friends came home and the noise woke me up, so I listened at my bedroom door to hear what was going on. My mother, father and the others sat around the kitchen talking and telling stories about the things that happened during the hunting trip. I found that no matter what was being said, I knew exactly what the next person was going to say. It was like I had dreamed the entire conversation just before waking up. I grew more and more freaked out as I started actually whispering to myself the exact statement the next person was going to say, a full 2 to 5 seconds before they said it. It took me a long time to get back to sleep after that. Ever since then I've never quite believed that the world is as it seems. My university was bisected by a big lake, with a bridge going across it with an island gazebo in the middle. One night I was walking down the side of the lake about to cross the bridge to go to a dorm on the other side. As I was walking down the sidewalk, I noticed some kid in a gray/white hoodie, with the hood up, walking across the section of the bridge on my side of the gazebo, towards my sidewalk. I didn't think anything of him until I walked by a big tree which blocked my line of sight for a second. When I got past the tree, I happened to glance back at the bridge and there was no one there. He couldn't have possibly walked off the bridge, he would have had to go right by me, and if he had turned around in the split second I couldn't see him, he wouldn't have had any time to get all the way back to the island, either. He was just gone. This gets creepier. About a year later, I was about to tell this story to my friend who had been abroad that semester. He'd never heard it, and before I even got to what I saw, he cut in with, "Wait, did you see a guy in a hoodie disappear?" Yes, he had seen something just like this freshman year. Fucking weird. I hated walking across that bridge alone from there on out. I was guarding the HSBC building in downtown Vancouver on afternoon shift. A call had just come in over the phone from the high-rise. A lawyer was possibly having a heart attack. I grabbed the AED and radioed for paramedics before jumping into the elevator and heading up. When I got there, the lawyer, we'll call him Tom, was laying on the floor, clenching his chest and looking very ashen. His skin was clammy, he was breathing heavily, and was complaining of agonizing chest pains. I shooed his coworkers away and stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. At this point, he seemed to be slipping in and out of consciousness, and I was readying the AED in case it was needed. Paramedics burst out of the elevator and began doing their thing. They had a much better defibrillator, of course, so I got the hell out of the way and began taking down names and times. Tom was conscious again, and was begging the paramedics to help him. He didn't want to die, he didn't have a will set up, He needed to call his ex-wife, etc. Suddenly, Tom looked up towards the ceiling, over the medic's shoulders. His face, already pale, whitened even further. He tried to scoot backwards on his butt, but the medics held him there, telling him to calm down. He paid them no attention, as if they weren't there, and screamed, "I don't fucking believe it. No no no." And then he made a heavy sigh noise, and flatlined. They weren't able to bring him back. We still never know just what he saw. And one from just last week which I posted to /NoSleep. I work in a high-rise in downtown Vancouver, and a pretty new one at that. It was built where an old office tower used to stand, and now houses well-off residents. I was approached yesterday night by a lady who seemed quite at the end of her rope. She had just moved her stuff in on Friday afternoon, and complained of a woman who kept trying to get into her condo. The new resident was alone Friday night, trying to unpack her bedroom boxes, when the front door began banging in the frame. She called out, and it stopped. Later on that same night, this time close to midnight, her front doorknob began to rattle. She yelled again and called the night guard, but no one was found in the area. Saturday night, same thing. Rattling doorknob, door banging in the frame. So yesterday, I went upstairs with the woman to check the area and her apartment area. Everything checked out. As I was leaving her suite, however, I almost ran headlong into an old gray-haired woman who was standing inches from the door. As any red-blooded Canadian would do, I jumped back like a scared little girl. The old woman stood her ground, looking between myself and the new resident. "Can I help you?" I asked, regaining my composure and straightening my tie. "No," the woman asked flatly. "I'm just waiting for the elevator." As if on cue, the elevator dinged and opened, and she got inside. I attempted to follow, but was too late and the doors slammed in my face. I asked the resident to come downstairs with me to review some CCTV footage. I honestly thought this was a family member of the previous owner, who still had her building pass card and was confused and lost her way. The new resident and I rewound the footage for the floor, and sat back to watch. When it got to the part where I opened the door, it appeared I jumped back at nothing. The hallway was empty.